Welcome back to this industrial series we are presenting on Webinar Wednesday, where we are talking all about best practices in setting up your industrial training program. Training to the gap this week, avoiding wasting resources in overtraining. You know, this is so important in this day and age when nobody can find enough people, where every manufacturer seems to have more work than they have time to get it done. Making sure that when we are training our people, we are doing it as efficiently as possible will, without question, create the best results. You know, we've come a long way in industrial training. The truth of the matter is that years ago, we used to grab these little things we called video cassettes. We'd put them into a video tape recorder, oftentimes integrated right in with a television, and set at the end of the table and have our learners, have our employees sit and watch videos. Well, fortunately, there aren't too many industrial employers that are still training their people this way, although there are some. And while this training is better than nothing, it is certainly antiquated in terms of the way that training has evolved. Unfortunately, in many cases, it has evolved to a classroom that looks like this, where we have an instructor sharing information, maybe presenting off of a video screen, maybe presenting out of a projector. Now, I can make jokes about this. I can criticize this model with impunity because I was an industrial employer and I did my training this way. The problem with this model of training is this. I have all of my people in a room going through it lockstep, exactly the same content at exactly the same time. And it doesn't matter if I have a team member who has been on my team for 20 years or more in the same room with somebody that's maybe only been with us for 20 months or even 20 days, they are all receiving exactly the same training. Now, do we really think in manufacturing, do we really think in industry that someone who has been doing a job for 20 years should get exactly the same training as someone who's been there for 20 days? Of course, we don't believe that. But many of us don't realize that there are much, much, much more efficient ways of training than putting every single employee in a room and delivering a lecture. Now, let's think about this. This week, I am traveling to Denver, Colorado for a business meeting. And so if I go onto Expedia and I want to take a look at what it's going to cost me to fly there, what is Expedia going to ask me? Expedia is going to ask me when I'm leaving. Expedia is going to ask me when I'm coming back. Expedia is going to ask me where I am going. And yes, Expedia is going to ask me where I'm starting. Nobody would plan a trip without knowing where they were starting from. But yet many times in manufacturing and in industrial training, that's exactly what we do. To give you a very similar example, later this year in the month of August, I'm taking a trip to southwestern Minnesota. And if I go on to Google Maps is going to ask me where I'm going, but it's also going to ask me where I'm starting. Why? Because without knowing where we're starting from, it is really, really difficult for us to plan the journey. Now, we don't do other things like this in manufacturing. We don't start without knowing the end or end without knowing the start in other parts of manufacturing. If I have a line down situation, if I need to troubleshoot my manufacturing line, I don't start replacing parts at random till the line starts working. At least I hope I don't. What am I trying to do? I'm trying to troubleshoot. I'm trying to figure out where the problem is. Where should I be starting and looking for the solution? I don't do that randomly. I try to figure out where I should start. Well, we have this same challenge in industrial training. Why are we still training like this when we know that when we're solving for a problem on a production line, when we're starting a journey, we have to know where we're starting from? Manufacturing training works exactly the same way. When we're putting together a manufacturing training program, we have to know where it is that we're starting from. Why is that? Because we want to pinpoint our training on an individual team member basis at the exact point where their knowledge ends and their learning opportunity begins. Think about this. If I have an employee and that employee is starting a training program, and I put them in a training program and teach them something they already know, teach them something they should have learned or did learn 5 or 10 or 15 years ago, what is going to happen with that employee? They are going to be bored with the content. They're going to feel insulted that you think that they don't know something that they already know, and they're going to turn on that industrial training program because they will see it as a waste of their time. Why should we teach something to somebody if they already know it? Now, the same result for different reasons can be true if we start somebody too far along in the program. If we have somebody that doesn't know certain things that they should know in order to start a new course, they don't have the prerequisite study, they don't have the prerequisite knowledge and skills, what's going to happen? They're going to be over their head. They're going to be confused. They are going to be frustrated. Now, will they come to you and say, I'm sorry you put me in the wrong course? I'm sorry I don't know the things that I should know in order to be in this course? Some of them might, but I can tell you from experience that a lot of them will not. Instead, they will suffer through the content. They'll try to grasp the content. And when it doesn't work, what will they blame? Will they blame their lack of experience? Will they blame the fact that they haven't had the training before? Maybe, but more likely they will blame the training program itself. And it can become one more reason that the training program will fail. That is why it is so important for us to figure out exactly where the knowledge ends and exactly where the learning opportunity begins on a learner by learner basis, so we can make the absolute best use of that learner's time. You know, I call it lean learning. Back in the 1950s, Taichi Ono from the Toyota company in Japan came up with what was called and what is called the Toyota production system. And in that system, he identified the 7 deadly wastes that manifest themselves in manufacturing. And he posited that if we can eliminate those 7 deadly wastes from our manufacturing operations, we can make our manufacturing operations much, much, much more efficient. And so we can see the 7 deadly wastes on our screen: motion and waiting and inventory, rework, overproduction, overprocessing, and transportation. These are the 7 ways that waste manifests itself in manufacturing. Well, guess what? These 7 ways manifest themselves in poorly designed training programs as well. If I have an individual who is in a training class with other people who are learning the content, and I'm the person who already knows the content, I am waiting for everybody else to catch up. Waiting is one of the 7 deadly wastes. And in the same way that waiting for material, waiting for inventory, waiting for a production part, waiting for a process is a waste in manufacturing, waiting for other people to catch up to where I am so that I can begin my learning, that is a form of waste. It's an inefficient way of training. How about rework? We all know about rework in manufacturing. If I have a manufacturing process that produces a part that I can't ship to a customer because there is a defect in that part, I have to rework that part, I have to throw that part away. That is waste. And in the same way, if I'm teaching somebody in my manufacturing operation something that they're not ready to learn, that's a form of waste as well, because they're going to have to go back and relearn what I thought I was teaching them the first time because they didn't have the prerequisite knowledge in order to be successful in my class. That's not their fault. That's my fault because I didn't do a good job of assessing where they were. What if I'm teaching somebody something that they don't need to know how to do for their job? What if I have something in my training program that I'm teaching somebody about? Let's say, for example, I have a manufacturing operation that is full of hydraulic power, but doesn't have any pneumatics. And yet I'm teaching somebody a pneumatics course in that manufacturing operation. That is a form of overprocessing. That is a form of putting too much value, quote, into the person that is not going to return itself to the company because that knowledge that we have invested in training them on is not something they can use at work. That's overprocessing in the world of training. All 7 of the 7 deadly wastes manifest themselves in a poorly developed training program in one way or another. So what do we do about it? The truth of the matter is that we can come up with very customized training programs for individual learners that do away with all of these forms of waste. Now, I have to tell you, first of all, that manufacturing plants are like snowflakes in this way. We've all heard the saying that no 2 snowflakes are exactly alike. Maybe that's true. I don't know how anybody went around and figured that out, but let's assume for the moment that no 2 manufacturing snowflakes are exactly alike. I can tell you that while they're not exactly alike, they look really, really similar to each other. Manufacturing plants are exactly the same way. No two manufacturing operations are exactly alike. No two manufacturing companies are exactly alike. But when we look under the hood, we find that the technologies, the things that their employees need to know, vary very little between employee to employee. There's not a lot of variation from person to person in companies and companies in terms of what people need to know about manufacturing technology. So that what I teach somebody in one manufacturing operation is oftentimes an associative skill that they can take to another manufacturing operation. This is an important point in training. You know, I had somebody, a friend of mine actually, from a huge original equipment manufacturer in the Midwest come to me a couple of years ago as we were touring his plant. And he had this manufacturing operation, a manufacturing line that was literally 3 city blocks long, one of its kind in the entire world. And he was trying to get me a little bit. And he said, so tell me what training you have for this. And I said, first of all, I have no training for that piece of equipment. And if I did, I'd have to charge you $3 million for it because you're the only person who would want to buy it. But then we started looking under the hood and we saw all of these technologies, manufacturing technologies such as mechanical drives and motor control and basic AC/DC circuits and basic fluid power circuits, electric relay control, variable frequency drives, programmable logic controllers. His special process was just a combination of very, very similar and very, very common manufacturing processes. And so I went on to explain to him, I can't find a trainer that trains to that piece of equipment, but I can train to every single one of those competencies. And then it's your job to bring that individual who is trained out to this line and show them how those processes and how those manufacturing technologies show up on that particular piece of training equipment. So when we're working with an industrial employer, we ask the question, what do your people do all day? And the truth of the matter is, the answers look very similar. If we're talking about somebody in electromechanical technology, in industrial maintenance, all of them have electrical systems. Every single one of them is using electronic systems, programmable logic controllers, variable frequency drives. Every single one of them is measuring parts, gauging parts, using dial calipers, using micrometers, using tape measures for that matter. They all use fluid power in one case or another. Sometimes pneumatics is a little bit more common. Sometimes hydraulics is a little bit more common, but every single one of them use it in one form or another. Same thing with automation and mechatronics and integrated technology, bringing all these technologies together. They all read blueprints. They all have to understand geometric dimensioning and tolerancing. They all have things like coding and heat treating and mechanical fabrication and electric torque wrenches. All of these other technologies are common across manufacturing, as is process control, in some cases more common than others. Same thing for fundamental industry concepts, machining, CNC, green energy, structural engineering, lean manufacturing, quality, workplace effectiveness, and safety. Every single manufacturing plant has the same types of technology. So the first thing that we do when we're figuring out how to make sure we're not training to things that people don't know is we spend time with them. We spend an entire day, many cases half a day, going through their manufacturing plant, looking at their technology, understanding how it manifests itself on the shop floor, understand what they're using and what they're not using. And then we sit down with that client and spend some time going through and creating a personalized learning program for every single employee. Now you ask, how long does that take? My goodness, that process must take weeks and weeks and weeks. The truth of the matter is I've done it dozens upon dozens, even more times. It takes about 3 hours. And literally in an afternoon, we can put together a training program specific to a group of learners. That's the first thing we do when we talk about training to the gap, understanding what technologies are common in the manufacturing operation and what technologies are not, and making sure that we are emphasizing in that training program those technologies that are common. When we're done, we end up with a sequence of learning opportunities for a learner, things like this list: AC/DC electrical systems, electric motor control, motor drive troubleshooting. Maybe we add in some PLC learning systems and understanding programmable logic controllers and variable frequency drives. Maybe mechanical drives are important: gears, shafts, pulleys, chains, belts, some basic pneumatics, some basic hydraulics, and some lean manufacturing concepts. This is just an example. every single one of these lists will look different. But then we have a problem. We don't necessarily know how much of this technology that learner is proficient with and how much they still need to learn. We don't know that right away. Maybe they had courses in AC/DC electrical systems when they were in technical college. Maybe they've learned enough about that in their job that putting them back through a course like that would be an inefficient use of their time. So what we can do is we can assess them in terms of what their skills and competencies are and begin their learning exactly where the knowledge ends and the learning opportunity begins. We do this using a tool we call e-assessment. Every single one of those courses we can assess on. And so we use that tool with that learner to identify whether or not they are competent in a specific subject matter area. And they go through a simple computer program. They answer some questions about the technology. We let them know in advance that this is not a test. This is really, really important. We're not trying to figure out what our people know and don't know so that we can use that as a stick. I once had somebody literally ask me this question saying, all of our maintenance technicians want a promotion. Can we use this to prove to them that they don't know what they think they know? And my answer was, I guess you could do that if you want a culture of people that are running scared and thinking you're out to get them. This is not a test. We don't even call it a test. We call it an assessment. We make it clear to the learner, nobody's out to prove that you can or can't do anything. We want to make the best use of your time when you start learning. Your time is valuable to us, and it's valuable to you. And we don't want to waste that time putting you in a course of content that you already know. We also don't want to waste that time putting you in a course of content that you maybe needed some prerequisites before you got into, and you end up being frustrated with the learning program. It's not a test. It is an assessment, but it identifies exactly where the knowledge ends and where the learning opportunity begins. So maybe our sample learner here already knows electric motor control and all of the other technologies in between that, and what we find out they actually need the most help on. Maybe they get all the way to an e-assessment on mechanical systems too, when we decide that that is where they should begin their learning. Think about all the efficiency we created in our learning program by skipping the courses above mechanical systems too. Think about all the frustration we saved that learner by not putting them through a learning program of things they already knew. Think about the message we send when we don't insult their intelligence by asking them to sit in a class learning things they learned 20 years ago. This is what lean learning looks like. This is what eliminating the gaps in a learning program looks like. So today we talked about training to the gap. We talked about identifying exactly where the knowledge ends and the learning opportunity begins. We talked about creating a course sequence for our learners that is exactly aligned with what they do day in and day out, or should be doing day in and day out, and what they should know when they come to work to do it. And we showed how we can then take that sequence of courses and identify, again, exactly where the knowledge ends and the learning opportunity begins by using e-assessment, by assessing their current knowledge and skills. It's not a test, it is an assessment, and it puts us in a position where that learner starts their learning exactly where they should. First of all, we end up with a much happier learner. We end up with somebody who is excited about their learning opportunity, who isn't insulted by it and isn't frustrated by it. And second of all, in this day and age, when we have way more work to do than resources to do it, we drive all of the waste out of our learning program and start those learners exactly where they should be. We save ourselves a ton of money, and we make our learning program much, much more successful. So thanks for being with us this week on Webinar Wednesday. We're going to continue this series of industrial topics throughout the summer and the fall. Some weeks, yes, and some weeks we'll have other topics. But over the course of that period of time, we will show you exactly how to lay out a world-class industrial learning program. We are here every single week on Wednesday afternoon at 2 p.m. Central. We'll see you next Wednesday.